Ben's final thoughts. Must it be something I did or didn't do? Surely she has a good reason. Why couldn't I have been better for her? A better husband? A better father? I guess it's me. She could never hurt anyone. Ben. Growing up in a small town in the Midwest was a pretty perfect life for most everyone around me. Everyone but me, of course. Not that I came from a bad family. I did. I really did. That was me. My name is Ben Davis, by the way. I lived with my mom and dad and my little sister Amy. The town we lived in, like I said, was really nice. Nice people, good schools, everyone worked hard and got along with each other. My mother worked at the local hardware store and my father was a machinist at a tool and paint store. They provided everything we needed and there were lots of family and friends around. So why was I the only one who couldn't enjoy this beautiful life right outside my door? Because I lived in my own world most of the time. In my early childhood, I was unresponsive to those around me. I was very quiet and had no language skills. I didn't know how to socialize. I didn't know how to communicate or connect with others. As I got a little older, my behavior became very unpredictable. I also had a strange sleep pattern. I didn't have what is now called office hours. Years later, doctors diagnosed me with autism. But in the 1970s, when I was a kid, especially in our small town, no one knew about such things. Surprisingly, I had something that other kids like me probably didn't have. I had a family support system like no other. My parents, as I said, are not doctors or psychiatrists, but they had an innate sense of how to help me. They were very patient with me, took their time, and worked with me every night without interruption. They talked to me about my hidden feelings, how to communicate better, and how to control certain urges. My sister Amy was 18 months younger than me, and they held me back a year so we would be in the same grade. She made sure I was in the right class, had the right book at the ready, and was seated so that I could understand at least what I knew how to do. Amy is very smart. Every night she would go over the day's work with me to help me cope with my studies. She's very pretty and popular. Because of this, she socialized with the other kids and for the most part kept the bullies away from me, both boys and girls. Without Amy and my mom and dad, I probably never would have made it through school. And after school, I would never have been able to live on my own. Amy. Some of my friends don't understand why I spend so much time taking care of my brother Ben. I'll tell you why. My brother is simply the most wonderful person I have ever known. He is the kindest and most loving person in the world. He has never been rude to me or anyone else. He has never said one bad word about anyone. My parents told me years ago that Ben would need me. They told me to treat it as an honor because Ben is such a good person. Because of his autism, Ben has a very hard time expressing any emotions. But every now and then, maybe only once a year, he gives me a long hug. It's the only way he can express his gratitude and his love for me. Every time he does that, I cry for hours. I know how hard it is for him, and I thank God that I know such a wonderful man. There are some things about my brother that he just doesn't understand. First of all, he is a very handsome guy. At about 6 feet tall and 165 pounds, he looks a lot like my dad, who is also good-looking. Second, he has a pretty high capacity right now. He can live on his own, but he will probably need help paying bills, shopping, and a few other things. Ben. After I graduated from high school, my uncle got me a job with the fire department. He had worked there for over 30 years, so he had a lot of influence. It took me almost a year to get certified. Surprisingly, I passed the physical test pretty well. It was the exams that proved to be very difficult for me. I could learn the material, but sitting through a timed exam was very difficult. In high school, teachers would let me take tests separately from my classmates, or just give me unlimited time. After I started, I would make a list of things to do each day. This way, my brain worked better. I just followed my list of instructions every day and worked harder than anyone else, keeping the trucks clean, making sure all the equipment was in perfect working order, and cleaning the station every day. All the other firefighters were nice to me, but I never had anything to say to anyone. I guess they liked me because I always pulled more than my share. I worked extra shifts every week if they had family business. On average, I worked about 60 hours a week. I never objected to that. They had families with children and I had no one. 60 hours a week may seem hard, but I loved my job and made a lot of money. The funny thing is that I spent almost none of it. I bought a used car and eventually moved out of my parents' house and into a small apartment. My mom helped me furnish all 4 rooms, and my younger sister came over every week to help me pay bills, do a little grocery shopping, or buy clothes, shoes, or anything else she thought I needed. 5 years later, I had over $250,000 in my investment account. I was at my little sister's house for a Sunday barbecue when my life changed forever. I was sitting alone in the backyard when the most beautiful girl I had ever seen came up to me to talk to me. She just walked up to me and started talking. "So you must be Amy's brother Ben. I've heard so much about you from your little sister. I'm the secretary where we work together. My name is Tony Adams. I apologize for being so abrupt, but your sister said you are a little shy and don't like to talk much." Well, it was my time to talk, and I had never been in this situation before. Sure, I'd hung out with my sister's friends a bit, but never with a strange girl who showed interest in me, and she was beautiful. "Oh, I'm glad you came to talk to me. I'm pretty quiet. Would you like to eat with me and we can spend some time together?" Wow, I can't believe I managed to utter a few sentences. After that, I let her do the talking. And she really liked to talk. I hardly had to say anything at all. She told me about her life, family, friends, basically everything. Did I mention how great she was? She was perfect. Other than my family, no one had ever made me feel this good about myself. She was beautiful, fun, and sweet, and she seemed to really like me. Amy. I was so glad I invited Tony to the barbecue. She was the new girl in the office where I worked. Simple-looking, 30, 40 pounds overweight, but very talkative. I thought she might be perfect for my brother. And I was right. Ben didn't need any coaxing. I realized he was smitten as soon as they met. I told Tony about my brother's problems and hoped she would treat him well. Tony. This guy is great. He's sweet, cute, has a good job, and I can tell he likes me. I've never had a boyfriend before. Sure, I've gone on dates, even let a few guys have sex with me because I wanted to know what sex was like. But never before has a cute guy acted so nice to me or given me so much attention. It's like a dream come true. I'm not going to let Ben go. This is my chance to have the home and family I've always dreamed of. Ben, life has been so good to me. A year after I met Tony, we got married. It was a small wedding, and my dad was the best man. I'd never made good friends in my life. I just didn't know how to do it. I invited people I work with at the firehouse. They all came. I think they had a good time. Tony invited a lot of friends and family. She is so wonderful and beautiful. I don't know why she likes me so much, but I try to do my best for her and always try to make her happy. Before we got married, I bought a nice 3-bedroom house that she chose. It is in a nice neighborhood. Tony wanted to have extra bedrooms when we have kids. I hope the kids will be like her and not like me. Amy and I never thought that when I invited Tony to that party that I would see her 25 years later, still married to my brother and with 2 children. She seems to be the one who decides everything in their family, and sometimes I wish she was a little more responsive to Ben's needs and wants. But Ben always seems so happy. He still thinks the world begins and ends with Tony. As long as he's happy, I shouldn't complain, should I? Tony, I know I shouldn't complain, but I wish Ben wasn't so malleable all the time. Of course he is. He's always letting me get my way. What woman doesn't want that? He still looks good after 23 years together. A little gray hair, but he stays in good shape through his physically demanding work. We're not rich, but he works overtime every week so I can be a stay-at-home mom. He is a good father and has never demanded anything for himself. I guess you could call him average in the bedroom, but that's the price I have to pay for everything else. He was so worried when both our children were born, afraid they would have his problems, but both were born perfectly normal. Simon, the oldest, joined the Navy after high school, and Melissa is a sophomore in college. Thank goodness I went back to nursing school when the kids went to high school. I would have lost my mind if I didn't have something to do, and as usual, Ben was very supportive of my decision. The schooling took 2 years, and Ben worked tirelessly to pay for it all without tapping into our savings. After school, I worked at a local hospital for a few years. I then moved on to work for a cardiology group. I like the slower pace of private practice and the close interaction with the doctors and other staff. After working in my new position for a while, I realized that all the other women on staff were very fit and attractive, and the doctors, most of whom were men, looked just as good and looked after themselves. This made me think for the first time in my life about how proper diet and exercise could help me. So I changed my diet and started exercising. It took me 5 months, but I lost 33 pounds. I also tightened up all over my body, and the weight loss made my breasts look huge. For the first time in my life, I started getting a lot of compliments from men. Even Ben told me I looked good. But he always says that. I guess I don't pay attention to what he says. For the first time in my life, I felt really sexy. Ben. It was early spring on a Friday morning. I was on my way to a new deli that all the guys from the firehouse wanted to try for lunch. It was on the other side of town, about 10 minutes from my job. We took turns picking up lunch, and today was my turn. But this morning, I wasn't thinking about sandwiches. I was thinking about how my wife behaved this morning when I left the house. She usually just says goodbye and sometimes kisses me on the cheek. She used to be a little more affectionate, but for some reason she stopped showing most of her affection. I'm not complaining. She must have a good reason. I've never seen her do anything unkind to the kids and me. This morning seemed different. As I was leaving and saying goodbye, she stopped me at the door, gave me a kiss on the cheek and a warm hug that lasted a few minutes. Then she simply said, "Goodbye, Ben." Admittedly, I'm not good at picking up on people's signs and emotions, so I didn't know why Tony was acting this way. My thoughts were interrupted when an emergency call came in on my phone that there was a fire at a local elementary school. Our fire station was 15 minutes away, but I was nearby, just a block away from the school. I was there in a matter of seconds. I only had a portable gas mask with me, so I took it out of the trunk and ran to the female administrator I knew. She told me that everyone was out, but they couldn't find the third-grade teacher and her students. Their classroom was on the second floor of an old 3-story building, so I took a gas mask and went inside. At first, I couldn't tell where exactly it was burning. It must have been somewhere under the ceiling, but the smoke was everywhere. I had a hard time opening the door to the classroom because the teacher was covered in smoke and lying right outside the door. 10 students huddled in one corner of the room. I guessed that some of them were unconscious, and grabbing the teacher by the shoulder, I went outside. As soon as I dropped her off, I went back for the students. I picked up 2 at a time. I didn't know what condition they were in and just grabbed them as fast as I could. I knew I didn't have much time because my portable mask wasn't full when I started, and I felt like I was quickly running out of air. I made 4 runs with the students and tried to get the last 2 out, a boy and a girl. As I was coming down the hallway for the last trip, 2 things happened. First, I ran out of air, and second, the ceiling in the hallway failed. The ceiling tiles and flooring from above started falling down on me. Several heavy objects hit my shoulder and back, but thank God they didn't hit my head. I had seconds left before I realized I was going to pass out. My last chance was to grab one of the student desks and ram an old-style window with it. The glass and wood flew in all directions, and I'm pretty sure I was covered in blood. I was wearing heavy boots and knocked the safety netting outside the window. Thank God they were old and gave in. I picked up a little girl and held her outside the window with my hands under her arms. There were people downstairs, and I just threw her to them. A few seconds later, I did the same thing to a little boy. That's the last thing I remember, as I must have passed out from the smoke and exhaustion. The next morning, I woke up in the hospital. I was told that all the children would be fine, but the teacher was on a tear. Seconds after I threw the boy out, our fire truck pulled up to the school. They put a ladder up to the window through which I was dropping the kids and came in after me. When I found out they had risked their lives to save mine, I fell down and cried. No one had ever done anything like that for me. After asking about the kids, the next thing I wanted to know was where was Tony? No one seemed to know where she was. I was so scared that something had happened to her. She could have hurt herself or something. I was so sad that something had happened to her and I wasn't there for her. Hundreds of people from our town sent flowers and cards, thanking me for saving those children and the teacher. Some of the children were in the hospital, and all of their families wanted to visit me to wish me well and thank me. I didn't want to see anyone. I was so worried and anxious about my wife that I didn't want to talk to anyone. The next day, Sunday, I told the doctors I wanted to go home. They said there was no way I could not go home. In their opinion, because of the physical and emotional stress, it was dangerous for me to leave the hospital. Everyone knew I hadn't heard from my wife, so they thought I shouldn't be alone. And I didn't care. I needed to go home and be near my wife. I needed to be home when she needed me. I didn't want to fight with anyone else, so I called a cab and drove home on Sunday afternoon. The house seemed deathly quiet. Something was wrong. Something was missing. I walked around the house but couldn't figure out what was different. Finally, here it is. On the kitchen table lay an envelope with my name on it. Amy. I couldn't believe it when the hospital told me Ben had gone home Sunday afternoon. I tried to call him Sunday night, but there was no answer. I know he wanted to be left alone, but I needed to check on him. When I arrived Monday morning, the house was locked, and I used my key to get in. What I found inside shook me to my core and broke my heart. Lying on the kitchen floor was my brother. The sweetest man I have ever known. He was barely breathing and completely incoherent. When I realized he was breathing and had a pulse, I called 911. While I waited for help, I picked up the letter Ben was holding and read it. Dear Ben, I'm so sorry to break this news to you, but I can't just tell you. I've fallen in love with someone else, one of the doctors in my office. We had been in a physical relationship for months, and I went away with him for the weekend to finally spend time together. Monday night, I'm coming home to get my stuff. I took most of the money out of my account and savings, but left you with a house that is paid for. I plan to move in with my lover as soon as possible. I realize now that I probably never really loved you, not the way I loved Nigel. He is everything I ever wanted to see in a man. Take care of yourself, and I hope you don't take this too badly. You always wanted me to be happy. Tony. I went to the hospital with Ben. I spent the night there as I felt I should be there after the doctors were able to assess my poor brother's condition. I called both of his children, told them what he had done at school, read them a letter, and finally helped them get home as soon as possible. The doctors immediately told me they were not sure Ben would survive. By mid-afternoon on Monday, they had placed Ben in the intensive care unit of the psychiatric ward. It seemed to me that they didn't really understand how to treat Ben. We are a small town with a small hospital, so they don't know what to do when a case like Ben's comes in. So I took advantage of what they could answer me and went to Ben's house to wait for his despicable wife. Tony. I guess I turned out to be just plain stupid and naive. I slept with Dr. Nigel Winterburn for 2 months. The sex was great, and I thought we really had a future. I thought I had fallen in love and found my soulmate when he asked me to spend a long weekend with him. I thought he felt the same way. He even told me he did. The first day and a half was wonderful. We had sex in the morning, afternoon, and evening. Sunday night, we finally went to a nice restaurant at the resort we went to. After dinner, we went to a club, and there good old Nigel, the guy I thought was the love of my life, started asking other women to dance. It was humiliating. When I complained about his attitude, he told me to try and pick up some guy and sleep in his room at night. I was so angry. I had been played by this asshole. I had just been used as a sex toy for most of the weekend. The next morning when he came back, I asked him how he could treat me like that after I left my marriage, and he told me he loved me. He said I was a fool to leave my husband because he would never leave his wife for me. He said he slept with 2 other women in our office, and they didn't get upset or hit on me. When I lost weight, he thought I went from fat to curvy and decided to see what I was like in bed. He probably knew that several other doctors wanted to try me when he was done. Now I'm going home to see Ben, but how will I ever get back to him even if he wants me? He is so weak and simple compared to the other men I work with every day. All the male doctors are so dynamic and real men, not the ones who need to be led around by the nose and who no one looks up to. When I got home for dinner Monday night, Ben's car was there, but the house was so quiet and all the lights were out. Finally, I spot my sister-in-law, Amy, sitting in the dark at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. "What's up, Amy?" I say. "I don't know why you're here, but I'm really tired. So could we meet up later in the week and talk about whatever's on your mind?" "No! We can't, Tony, so why don't you sit down now and I'll tell you what's been going on in your life while you've been fooling around." She went on to tell me an incredible story about how Ben heroically rescued 11 people from a burning building, almost died, couldn't figure out where his wife was, drove home from the hospital against doctor's orders, worried about me, and ended up in the hospital after reading my letter. What on earth had I done? "Amy, I hate to ask this, but would seeing Ben help me?" I was disgusted with her. "You're not going to do any of that. Ben is in a psychiatric ward in isolation right now. He has suffered a severe physical, emotional, and mental breakdown. The doctors are trying to figure out how to treat him. At this point, they have told me that he may never recover. They believe that if you see him, it could trigger another incident that would kill him. Oh, Amy, what have I done? I'll tell you what you've done. You've destroyed the nicest man you've ever known. A true hero who wouldn't hesitate to give his life to save others. This man gave you everything. When you met and married him, he had neurological issues. It was challenging, but not scary. It turned out he was better than everyone else. God gave you the ability to care for this man, to accept his love and everything else he could give you. You had a responsibility to take care of Ben and remember how much you meant to him. He once told me that you were his perfect angel. But what did you do? You not only hurt that man, you destroyed his soul. Shame on you, Tony. Epilogue. Amy. After the fire, Ben lived for about 5 more months. Specialists were brought to the hospital to examine him, but there was nothing they could do. They said that the physical and mental trauma of the fire and the emotional devastation of the letter were too much for him to bear. The whole town seemed to come to his funeral. He was a little boy who grew into a man in our small town. He hardly spoke to anyone. Very few people knew him, hardly ever talked to him, never paid attention to him. But he will always be remembered as the greatest hero our town has ever known. He literally walked into hell to save those innocent children. I wonder how many families would have been destroyed if it wasn't for my brother. Because of her betrayal, Tony was universally ostracized. Her children never forgave her, nor did the rest of the town. She sold her house, gave the money to her children, and soon left town. I have no idea where she is now, but she left a broken woman. Ben's children are doing well. His son Simon Davis is still in the Navy, and his daughter Melissa graduated and now lives and works in our town. Dr. Nigel will not be returning as he too has been driven out of town. His wife divorced him, took him to the cleaners, the doctors in his group got rid of him, and he ended up leaving for parts unknown. I think about Ben every day, why he had to love his woman so purely to see nothing wrong. I will never know the answer to that question, but I do know one thing. The world is a much better place because of this wonderful man.